Thank you so much, all of you, for being here. It's wonderful to see you. My name is Henry Tricks. I write the Schumpeter column in the business section of The Economist. It's a delight to have you all here, and I just want to kick off by saying thanks very much to the sponsors, which is the Bahrain Economic Development Board, who have helped us put together this event. We are going to be focusing this afternoon mostly on generative AI. A topic that I'm sure all of you have had to deal with over the course of this year. It has actually been the most extraordinary year for generative AI. I would imagine that this time last year, I don't know about you, but I certainly never heard of a large language model, and ChatGPT itself was not something that I had heard of, let alone downloaded. Yet since last November, there has been this extraordinary boom first of all, in financial flows into venture capital firms. So by our estimates at The Economist, about $40 billion went into Gen AI startups in the first half of this year, which is about a quarter of all VC investment. I think you've probably seen that just yesterday, Amazon, through its lot-in with the other tech giants by investing $4 billion in Anthropic. So, you know, it seems like the excitement from a financial point of view is still there. There's also a tremendous amount of innovation, which we're hearing a lot about. We'll talk today, I guess, about how much we're actually seeing on the ground level. But certainly you're hearing about Gen AI use in law firms, in science, in medicine, and certain use cases. And there's innovation that it changes daily, pretty much by the day or by the week. And the last, the most recent addition is something that I've been really looking forward to, which is the voice version, the human voice version of ChatGPT. I've actually had the opportunity to listen to various of these chatbots which say that they can use voice. And it's an excruciating process because you have to wait for ages before you get a response. But apparently this one is the business, and we will be able to talk to our apps shortly. And you can imagine that this is going to be kind of like the sort of Scarlett Johansson her experience that we're all going to get, which is either exciting or completely creepy, depending on what your point of view. Anyway, the speed at which this technology is developing is leading to calls for regulation. And what's weird about this tech boom is that the calls for regulation seem to be coming from the incumbents rather than from the rest of society. And, you know, that raises suspicions, right? Are they actually doing this in order to wrap themselves up in red tape and protect themselves from competition? Or are they genuinely concerned about the speed and of the innovation? A few months ago, I visited Anthropic, that company that Amazon has invested in, and I was absolutely shocked. I expected them to really talk in boosterish terms about their AI chatbot called Claude. But the conversation started with a discussion about nuclear weapons. And it was literally them saying, you know, what we're doing is we're going back to the way that people tried to regulate nuclear weapons in 1946 and thinking, is this the way that we should be regulating generative AI? So very quickly, there's the discussion about regulation has taken hold. Anyway, the big questions, and I will bring on the panel right now. The big questions that we are going to be looking at, I guess, or what everyone is talking about at the moment is, first of all, I guess, is Gen AI a flash in the pan? I mean, no, probably, but how durable is it? How much evidence is there that it is actually becoming embedded in organizations, businesses, etc.? Will it be dominated by the big tech incumbents, or will it be the newcomers, and can it be made trustworthy? So let's just use that as the sort of starting off point, I guess, or setting the stage for the discussion that we're going to have right now. And so to address those questions, let me invite up our four brilliant panelists. And let's start off with the person whose name is hardest to pronounce, which is Alyssa Lefebvre-Skopitz, who is the acting executive director of the Responsible AI Institute. Thank you, Alyssa. Rodrigo Madanes, who's the global artificial intelligence leader at EY. Musab Abdullah, who is the executive director of the business development ICT at the Bahrain Economic Development Board. Thanks, Musab. And Lisa Kant, Senior Vice President, Product Marketing at Zendesk. And just before we kick off, let me just ask you all to be thinking about questions, because we will throw this open to questions. What we've discovered, even as we were discussing around the table beforehand, is that there are no kind of definitive answers when it comes to AI. We're all in exploratory mode. So your questions are as valid as everyone's questions. So let's start off with the durability question. Is Gen AI here to stay? I think some of the excitement waned this summer. There was slightly less usage of ChatGPT. Does that imply that this has been overhyped? What do you think? Let's start with you, Musab.
Sure. So first of all, thank you all for joining us today, and my thanks to The Economist. No, I think the genie's out of the bottle. If this was a matter of it was just being discussed at a corporate level or in very specific use cases, then maybe. But the fact of the matter is it's out, it's in the public domain, people are using it. I mean, since when have you known people to avoid using easy tools and go back to harder tools? So no, it's here to stay, and fortunately or unfortunately, as are its problems. Okay, and I think one of the biggest issues that we have is that it got pushed into the public domain, and everyone started thinking of it in the terms of science fiction, the terms of what they see on TV. Oh, AI is right, the AI is best, AI is good. AI has a whole host of problems, and I think when you take those problems into account, it can be very, very useful. When you don't, it can be very, very problematic, and I think that's what we're going to be discussing today as we shed some light on that. But is it here to stay? Oh, absolutely. It's going to get more powerful, it's going to get bigger and bolder, and we just need to be careful how we use it.
Shall we just ask you, because you are, I think, all of us on the panel, Zendesk is probably using AI from a business perspective. How do you view it?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely think that it's a here to stay factor. Though the biggest proof point I would point to is not from my role at Zendesk, but from the fact that I'm a mom of 2 kids, and it's in schools. Right, like kids are using it in college already, and so I think we're going to see not just the demand at the corporate level, but we're going to see as the next generation comes up that they're steeped in this stuff already. So we fundamentally believe, and I definitely believe it's here to stay.
And what about at Zendesk itself? Are you using it at all in the company?
Yeah, so we use generative AI in, I would say, 3 different ways. So we think about it within our own product set. So how do we build generative AI into the products we offer? And for those of you who aren't familiar with Zendesk, we're one of the leading providers of digital customer service software. And customer service is one of the places, like one of the first places I think that everyone talks about that AI and generative AI have a huge opportunity to evolve. The second is how it's going to evolve our own workforce. right? So we're thinking about how do we use it, across product, engineering, marketing, sales, and really every single department. And then the third is, how is it evolving the way our customers operate and then our relationship with them as a result?
Rodrigo, you see this, from EY's perspective, you are presumably giving advice to a lot of companies about this. Can you kind of tell us what your lessons are from the first year of the Gen AI hype cycle?
Sure. So what I'm seeing when I talk to companies is that I try to separate out into 2023 and 2024. 2023 seems to be the year where big companies are doing four things. They're getting their AI strategy together. That comes from the C-suite. What's our AI strategy? They're putting their task forces together, because to actually implement a lot of these programs internally requires risk assessment, technology, business, general counsel. So they're putting their task force. So it's strategy, task forces. They're all doing their pilots and prototypes to learn. So it's all about learning right now. That's 2023. And number 4 is they're all doing their compliance. There's a ton of compliance that needs to happen to be able to deploy this internally or externally. So we're seeing 2023 is the year of the pilot. It seems to be that right now the goal is to 2024 will be the year of the scale up of AI usage widely. This is somewhat informed too by, in terms of the question, is it here to stay? I think it's a good question in terms of, I think the expression is too way above our skis or falling over the skis. Like, have we moved too far? People forget that when ChatGPT was launched, it was a research preview. That's what happened on November 30. It's a research preview. Suddenly it's like, oh my God, it's out, it's a huge product. Wait, this was for researchers originally. We probably are a little bit ahead. The expectations are a bit ahead of what we can do, but is it here to stay? When you look at the investments in AI chips, there's a scarcity problem out there, which everybody talks about. There's massive investments going on in the background to scale up for 2024. So it doesn't look like a flash in the pan that is going away.
Sure. And just before we get to that kind of big question about the costs and the implementation and that kind of thing, Alicia, maybe you could talk, if 2023 has been anything, it has been a year in which the regulatory question has come up very fast. Does that make you feel good?
Generative AI was like the Trojan horse of AI. I think sometimes we're over-indexing on generative AI when AI generally that isn't generative AI is still very impactful for business. But from a responsible and trustworthy AI perspective, I joined the Institute 2 years ago, and I was talking to business leaders across the board, and they were like, yeah, it's nice. I really like that idea, but I have a laundry list of expectations of my team, and so this is not a high priority. And then a number of things happened that made the responsible and trustworthy AI conversation very much a high priority. Compliance, the forthcoming regulation that's happening in multiple jurisdictions, people seeing the opportunities, but the friction between opportunity and risk with generative AI, and then just the public awareness, but from schools to all organizations. Now people are like, this isn't a bad Netflix recommendation. This could actually have some very real consequences and harm. So we need to grapple with what's our risk appetite? How do we put the right guardrails in place so we can actually foster innovation? And to get back to your question, the regulatory stick has definitely been a driving factor to this, as well as the kind of competitive advantage of adopting it responsibly. So regulations are like a real meatball. It's going to be fun. But yeah, it's the compliance aspect that you mentioned is a big part of what I think has put this at the top of people's priority list.
Can you guys just talk a little bit about what you see from within inside your organizations or government or whatever, in terms of the fears about what the displacement effect that generative AI could produce, and obviously the opportunities? Are the visionaries, is their vision in a sense shared right the way down the organization, or are there deep concerns within the organizations about what this means?
I can start with that one.
Right.
I think there's kind of this inverse relationship of a rising optimism of leadership around some of the efficiencies that can be gained and some of the things that might bring a lot of value to the organization. But you're actually seeing boots on the ground and people that are practitioners or potentially having their jobs displaced not having that optimism. So when it comes from a transformational leadership perspective, there seems to be a delta or disconnect in, boots on the ground and how that actually feels inside of an organization, awareness, training, transparency around how AI is being used, and then actually what the optimism is at a leadership level. So I think there is a really big opportunity and need to be able to connect those dots internally as leaders to make sure that you can harness this without disillusioning people inside your organization. And it's going to be a competitive labor market in this space, and those that are putting human-centered or responsible AI at the core, I think will win.
I think if I could weigh into this one, it's I agree with Alyssa that there does seem to be a delta between sort of optimism and skepticism. The challenge is understanding that, first of all, this is a disruptor. We've seen disruptors before it. So are there going to be jobs displaced? Yes. Are there going to be jobs that fill it? Yes. Are they going to be equal proportion? We don't know, okay, because we still don't fully know where all this is going. But I think some of that optimism versus skepticism, and here I'm talking a little bit more broadly, not specifically about an individual organization, is also about how prepared you are to use it and leverage it. The more you understand its applications and non-applications, and the more you are prepared to leverage it, then the more confident you are. So if I could put this in, let's say, a Bahraini context, we've been considering AI for the last 4 or 5 years. Essentially what happened was His Majesty the King at the opening session of Parliament essentially urged the country to consider applications of AI, way ahead of today the generative AI boom. And Bahrain historically, one of our strengths is that we are way ahead of the curve when it comes to digitizing data. Even prior to cloud applications and the like, Bahrain was very advanced in deploying e-government. We then were very advanced in adopting the cloud. We're at about, I think, 80% of all government sits on the cloud today. So what that does is it puts us in a position where we understand how to use data. And therefore, we understand that there are applications we want to use data. We have government institutions, we have private institutions using whether ChatGPT or others today. But we also understand that there's a lot more to go. It's going to require talent, it's going to require vision, it's going to require some level of regulation or compliance. It can be done with cautious optimism, I think.
It's interesting that you mentioned sort of digitalization strategy. And Rodrigo, you know this as well as I do, and I'm sure Lisa, you can see this too. There is a sort of there's always an impetus, there is an impetus to digitalize, but actually the failure rate of digitalization is really quite high. And I'm wondering how we should think of that in the context of generative AI, in terms of if you decide, okay, I'm going to bring this into my organization, how do you do that? Do you decide that you need a top-down approach, that it's the CEO who decides and he says, right, troops, this is the way we're going, etc.? Or do you do various pilots? Do you buy, do you build? Lisa, why don't you start?
Sure, yeah. So I do think it depends on the maturity of your organization, as you were saying. That said, we're running our own pilot within Zendesk across every organization. And it's a combination of a tops-down mandate and then departmental hub leaders who are owning that groundswell. And we're piloting use of generative AI in literally every department at Zendesk. And we're monitoring, right? And so it's everything from, one, how do you know what to track and monitor? What types of things should I be looking for improvements in? Something like code development is relatively straightforward, but other departments like HR or sales, we're actually using generative AI as a training buddy for a sales rep that is, going to try a pitch out on generative AI, and then it will come back with, hey, here's what a customer might say to you, and you're actually practicing like that real life sparring, which is just a use case I'd never imagined. So you need that, I'd say, groundswell to find the right use cases and the right applications.
Maria, what is your advice there? Is it better to pilot, or is it better to take a more dictatorial top-down approach?
Well, what we're seeing is both things are happening, if you will. First of all, it doesn't come from the CEO. The CEO is typically saying to all the functions and business units, you need to figure out your AI strategy. And then, so it goes further down until people closer to the actual usage can start devising plans that make sense. At the same time, this technology is fairly open. So if you have your data sitting within your proprietary cloud, so it's guarded, but you have a large language model, like a behavior like ChatGPT, but internally, people will do different things with it. They will, they're creative. If you give people tools, they will use it in creative ways. So we see that happening, and then the question becomes, how do you note that and scale that up and showcase as case studies internally and amplify the creative uses that ingenious people are devising to gain productivity? So there are definitely plans coming down, but employees are using it very creatively, and those are being magnified.
And I think it's also like giving them that opportunity to play or to experiment as they're really just solving a business problem or a productivity or an efficiency problem that naturally would surface. It's like, can I actually make this a lot easier? And I think by creating those proprietary models or potentially those safe, sandbox is a word, but those safe areas, those use cases will naturally surface because business problems and opportunities for efficiency, people that want to make their jobs easier will surface really interesting use cases for you.
So do you think that those use cases at the moment are almost exclusively within the organization? In other words, trying to find ways of making the organization run more efficiently? Or do you think that they're already being applied to the business model itself? In other words, how can we use AI to disrupt this industry? I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, we've been seeing, globally speaking, we've been seeing a lot of, I don't want to say odd, but unexpected is perhaps a better word, use cases of it. I mean, even here in the US, there've been cases of lawyers submitting AI-generated arguments to court, and then running into the various problems that would create. We've seen cases where people try to model business plans on AI and run into flat out incorrect data. So it's by no means limited to organizations. I think organizations are trying to make sure that they don't leave a tool on the table. Okay, now actually it's even more in depth than that. There are organizations that want to develop it and be a first mover and therefore reap the gains of being a first mover in that. There are other organizations that are worried that their competitors will gain advantage over them and don't want to leave that on the table. And then there are all the people in between that are just trying to make their lives a little bit easier, a little bit better. So trying to define the problem as within an organization, how big do you go? Is the organization a household, a company, a country, the globe? We're seeing interactions everywhere.
I wonder if you could talk a bit about how we handle the hallucination question, I guess. The fact that, often the answers are wrong.
Yes.
How serious is that to deal with, and how do you deal with it? Maybe, Alicia, do you want to start on that?
Yeah, I'll definitely deal with. So it's incredibly serious, but it also depends on how you're using it and the risk paradigm. So there's a variety of tools and kind of technologies out there that are meant to detect hallucinations, but I think it really comes down to having proper governance and guardrails in place around how you deploy AI internally generally. So again, I can speak specifically about the hallucinations issue, but in the absence of foundational responsible AI practices within your organization, kind of dealing with these problems with AI and one-offs are going to be really hard to do. So what we really advocate for is, having clear principles, having governance, having policies and procedures, and being able to scale that across a variety of business units. And so, I think saying that we want to do AI responsibly or do AI without the risk of hallucinations is like saying we want to build airplanes that won't crash. It goes without saying. And so there's really like key foundational things that need to happen organizationally that need to be developed by internal leadership to say, okay, hallucinations is one issue, and I'm sure Rodrigo can go more into kind of the technical aspects of that. But, it's responsible AI is a barnacle sometimes onto the side of AI deployment, and you get people going around with their responsible AI hat to security for some money and privacy and potentially like tech, and it's actually not given any stature inside of an organization, which is a huge issue. So as transformational leaders in this room, this is my soapbox, I'll get off it soon, this actually has to have a budget, it has to have someone who's accountable to it, and it has to have stature. And that will be one aspect of dealing with hallucinations. And so I went broad to ship the ball to someone who wants to go narrow, but I think that part is important to say.
Yeah, I'm happy to chime in here. So I think, one of the things, you mentioned we're in like the pilot phase and we're going to the deployment phase. I think the other phases that we think about within AI are AI, which is human assistance AI versus AI standalone. And certainly in the organizations we deal with and in bringing it into our product, it's very much AI as an amplification of human work today. And so I think we see that human quality control as being a critical piece of AI or generative AI, because it is so reliant not just on getting the answer right, but having the right knowledge base to draw from. Mm-hmm. So the AI can give you the right answer. It's not hallucinating, but if it's drawing from incorrect or out-of-date information, it's just as bad. And so I think those are things that companies are really thinking about right now, and is part of the fear, right, of this generative AI unharnessed kind of taking over.
I think like the issue, the hallucination problem is a really serious issue. It's is there a solution? I don't know. We don't know what causes it to be able to start articulating a solution. But the problem with it, to put it another way, is that it undermines trust. Okay, now different people could understand trust in different ways. So let me give you one particular definition, or one possible definition. It's the predictability and consistency of the output. Okay, so if I know the output is chaotic, okay, fine, I trust that the output is chaotic. But if I expect the output to be accurate and it's not, that's where it undermines trust. Now, non-generative AI and generative AI share a lot of the same problems, but this seems to be exacerbated by the fact that we're asking it to generate content for us, and we expect it to be accurate. Now, to your point that sometimes it's using outdated data, that's to an extent okay, at least it was factual data. But when you have an AI that's spewing out content, and it's saying it's accurate, and when you challenge it, it insists it's accurate, this is where you have a problem, because if someone then believes it, passes it to their line manager, and that line manager then passes it to another organization, the ripple effect could be quite big. Mm-hmm. Part of it is awareness, that you can use it to generate prompts. Like just as we give it prompts, it can give us in return slightly more elaborate prompts. But the moment we start at this stage using it as the be-all, the end-all, and very accurate data is when I think we're going to start seeing propagation of issues, and could in fact derail some of its applications.
It's really interesting that you mentioned trust, and Rodrigo, you started off talking about compliance. I mean, one of the trust questions, the big trust questions, is basically how watertight is this data that's being used from a copyright perspective, etc. And can you talk about that? I mean, are we at a point at the moment where companies are almost reluctant to take the plunge because they're so worried about the legal implications of what they're doing?
So I'm not a lawyer. And there are certainly concerns, and that's what I meant by these task forces and the compliance exercise, where it's not simply you asking the engineering team to go build something. It's what does the risk team say? What does our general counsel say? What are the, in different jurisdictions, particularly as multinationals, what are the particular laws that are applicable in the US versus the UK versus other countries? So that's a very tough exercise. This is what I mean by there's a lot of compliance that's going on. I wanted to just take one brief to explain a bit for folks here who don't know what the hallucinations problem is. The way these generative AI or large language models work is they're fed huge amounts of data from the web and from books. The numbers that I did is you're basically feeding it 20 to 30% of all books ever written. So it's like 1 trillion tokens, and all of these get shredded and mangled in words, and they create a gigantic model with weights and balances that represent all that knowledge. But it's not like a search engine. It's been shredded to pieces. So when you ask it a question, the large language model looks at all these shredded words, and the algorithm starts choosing words one after the other, next word, and it creates this sentences and paragraphs that make tons of sense, but they were generated. They weren't grabbed straight from the book. And sometimes what happens is that it creates sentences that can't be attributed to any book, to any fact. They're actually made up. They never existed. They're never in the corpus that was fed into it. And the term in the industry is a hallucination. That's the word they use, which basically means it's saying something that never happened. And that's what everybody's trying to grapple in the industry as to how do you manage that. And it's a particular problem if you use it for research. When you ask it questions, it's less of a problem in use cases such as when you give it a bunch of text and you say, can you summarize this for me? Where you're giving it this text already. So there are instances where it's much bigger problem and less of a problem. But I just wanted to give the hallucination context for people who are less familiar with that term than this panel.
Should we just talk a little bit about who is going to win? Who's going to win in the AI race? And clearly the first movers and the ones who have the compute power, who have the data, and who have the cash are the tech giants, right? That Microsoft clearly and Google, and now we're seeing Amazon moving in more, and Meta. So do you think that this is a game in which the outcome is already decided in terms of who wins and who loses? Or is there, and how should we think about the fact that they are the ones who are kind of leading the push for regulation? Is that a genuine sense that they're aware of the safety considerations, or are they basically just trying to protect their turf?
Oh gosh, there you go. I had to get one out there. So I don't know. I'm genuinely concerned about this. I think the ecosystem is looking at open sourcing a lot of these LLMs and large language models. Of course, there's a concern around that because we don't want to give it to potential bad actors, which is a kind of inevitable. So I'm worried about the kind of the predominant, like the very clear competitive advantage some of these big players have. I also think that there will likely need to be some sort of like civil society or government intervention that supports startups and scale-ups and other organizations to actually be able to compete and invest in this. Otherwise, there will just be the supremacy of big tech. And of course, you hear Sam Altman and others saying like, yeah, we love regulation, pro-regulation. But then I would, challenge everyone to go look at their government relations and kind of advocacy budgets on the back end about what that looks like, right? So it's very advantageous. And of course, regulation generally, people know it's coming, so like get on the right side of that. But there's obviously a huge amount of lobbying in the back end around what it'll look like. So I think regulation is inevitable. I think them saying that I like regulation puts them on the right side of that. And I think generally like knowing the rules of the game will help everyone play. But I don't know what the future will hold in terms of the supremacy, but I have concerns.
I think We're going to see some. We're going to see some. We're going to see some models that will definitely lead the charge, and these are companies that have the resources to pour into it to make them more broad use. That said, I don't think it's going to be limited to them. Okay, now, from the foundational models, perhaps it does take a large set of training data. It does take a lot of resources to get to a usable state. But there are still huge privacy concerns around this. I mean, just when you feed the model data, it's like, what's the saying? When you peer into the abyss stares back into you. So as you feed the model a question, it's actually learning off of what you're giving it, which can then show up in answers for other people who may not be cleared for such data, whether it's personal or institutional or governmental. So I suspect we're going to be seeing a lot of these models customized for internal usage. Now that could be by company, by country, by whatever. How that is handled is going to be very critical, because we still have, in addition to the hallucination problem, we still have several others we haven't touched upon, one of which is the black box problem. We don't know how the model was developed. We don't know what training data was fed. Therefore, we cannot assess any biases it has, any gaps in its knowledge. We don't know. And because of that, until the companies are willing to crack open that black box and share with us exactly what went into it, which often is going to be a trade secret, I think others are going to start developing their own bespoke solutions. So they're probably going to have an early advantage. They're probably going to win more of the open individual user market, but I'm not so sure just yet about markets that deal with more confidential data.
And if you don't mind, I'd just like to finesse, to add another point to the question, which was, so there were three horses that were mentioned, but there's a fourth horse, and that's open source. And actually, this kind of ties these 2 points together, because over the weekend, we ran an article in The Economist about Abu Dhabi generating a new basically an open source version of ChatGPT, not called ChatGPT, called Falcon something or other, which apparently is really, really good. So to what extent should we kind of think of this as being a competition between the three horses that you mentioned and open source?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in here. So when I think about the competition, I think about the competition on a few different vectors. I think about sort of the race to win the consumer application, then there's the business application, and then I think there's also the partnering with business, like being built into the product. And I do think that it's hard for me to imagine, though obviously I don't have a crystal ball, that there's going to be one technology that's just far superior than the others. I think we're seeing that these technologies, while they come out at first and maybe have a slight advantage, over time they end up being about equal in terms of the processing power of the model, and it becomes about the things they're offering in terms of the choice, security, transparency, the things we've been talking about, and some of those choices they make internally about how they want to partner. I think those choices will lead to, they may be different depending on which goal they have. Like, do they want to own the consumer? Do they want to be the platform of choice for businesses? And so I actually think we're going to see a different winner in each of those areas.
That's interesting. Anyone else have any?
I mean, I'll resonate with what you said, Henry, which is that open source is a not talked about much in broader circles, but if you're in tech, there's a tremendous amount of activity going on in open source. I think what you were referring to was who's going to win what is called the foundation model race, which are the core components. And there's a lot of open source foundation models like Falcon that you mentioned, and there's a number of others, which the way Gen AI community works is there are certain benchmarks that are standardized across the industry that you can compare different models according to how well does it perform, like miles per gallon, if you will, for cars. And some of these open source models are very competitive to GPT 3.5, not 4.0. So they're performing really well for many use cases. I think what is unappreciated in, broadly speaking, I guess, outside of the tech circles, is that there's been a tremendous amount of open source activity in what's called the orchestration layer, or the layer that sits above the foundation models, which is all the tooling you actually need to deploy this application. So like integrate it into your own databases, connect it to web services, making these things very usable. And the winners in that orchestration layer seem to be these open source projects that are getting a lot of traction and being integrated into a lot of proprietary infrastructure. So I think the open source is a very quiet entrant in this field, but it's very, very powerful and moving very fast.
When I wrote a column about the regulation of AI, and I made what I thought was going to be quite a strong point about how the big tech firms were using regulation in a sense to try and stifle the risk of competition from from open source. And my editors had talked to so many of the incumbents that I got a very strong message back. You don't know how worried we should be about open source. Is that right, Alicia? And partly because of China. Partly because of this idea that anyone can get hold of this technology.
It's really hard for me to comment on all these things, because I don't want to be catastrophic in kind of the fear-mongering around what it can and can't do. I often think about it could be very, very dangerous, open sourcing, and I get that, but I also think not open sourcing has its own risk factors in terms of not creating opportunity for other people to use AI to solve some of the world's hardest problems. And so how do you balance these things? I don't have the perfect answer. I do have genuine fear about the risk of AI, but there will always be bad actors and there will always be nefarious people. I often think about what are the unintended harms that really good people using AI are actually coding into some of their models, and then decision making at scale with that unintended harm. So, automated lending or some of those things. And so I don't have an answer for you in terms of how worried should we be. You should be fearful if I did know that answer. But I also, all of this is about trade-offs and conversations and what our risk tolerance will be around this. But I don't want to over-index on this and forget about just some of the other things that can happen with AI, even with people that are trying to do the right things, because we're not going to really escape the nefarious use of AI on a geopolitical scale.
Yeah, I would sort of say the answer to your question feels like yes to both, which is that yes, these incumbents are pushing regulation because they're fearful of it, but yes, they're pushing it because they want to get entrenched. And so we have to figure out the way to regulate, but not get the, but still create space for innovation.
Mm-hmm.
It's a small mandate, and we need to buckle up.
We've got a couple more minutes. Does anyone have a yes? Here. Could you just take the mic? Yes, and tell us your name, could you?
Doesn't matter. I'm a human. So two things you all didn't touch upon are new business models which will come out because of this. I mean, we're talking about enterprise, how they'll use it and stuff like that. So that's something which I think is happening with the 40 billion investment. The second thing you talked about, we don't know what the black box is. But even the GenAI people don't know. I mean, with RNNs and GANs, even they don't know. I mean, even talk to Ilya or Hinton, they were like, I don't know what's happening inside that. And that's why you're prompt engineering. So nobody knows.
Which I think is the problem.
Right, so it's not like they're trying to, keep all their things for themselves. And it's like, I'm not going to tell you because I've got proprietary stuff.
Well, so if you give a person or a machine decision-making power, now just giving it a prompt and saying, oh, this is curious is not an issue. We're saying it's giving you information that you are then acting on. I mean, it's, okay, let me give you a metaphor. You hang out with friends and Bob, who's never worked in the financial industry in his life, says, here's an investment strategy for you. You're not likely to say, hang on what basis are you telling me this is the right approach? Or it's like, I think you should build a plane with 7 wings. Why? But that's the problem. We don't know why AI is spitting out certain or generating certain responses. Now, when you take them as a response and you just sort of think about it, it's like, I never thought of it that way. Maybe this could work. And then you do your own due diligence, That's fine. It's the cases where we see people just take it wholesale and submit it. And we're seeing it, as I said, there are cases of it being submitted as court evidence. There are cases being submitted as schoolwork. There's cases submitted as business planning. That is a real problem. Because what if that company then gets sued for bias in whichever of the many ways? The company can't defend itself. They cannot factually say, yes or no, bias was there. So it's an issue.
I think we, on that note, will draw this panel to an end. And I have to say that considering that a lot of our answers were, well, we just don't know, or, that's still to be determined, or I don't want to come out too much this way because I don't want to. I thought that our panelists explored this topic with an incredible clarity and eloquence, and it was really, really enjoyable to listen to you guys. So thank you very much indeed. Thank you.